Welcome. In this video, we'll focus on function notation, absolute value 2. Let's take a look at our first example. Example 1. Given f of x is equal to 4 times absolute value of x minus 3, find f of 2. So we're going to find f of 2 in two different ways. Let's use our method 1 to figure that one out. Method 1 is also known as the description method. Now, what do I mean by description? Well, notice that in order to generate your function f of x, we take the input x, and we're going to obtain the output 4 times the absolute value of x minus 3. So let's describe what's going on here. Well, the first thing we do is to have that input. So we can say that we're going to pick a number. And in that case, we're going to call that number x. Now, once you're given x, the first thing you're going to do to it is to take its absolute value. So step 2, take its absolute value. Thus, you get absolute value of x. Now, the next thing you're going to do is to multiply that by 4. So that's step 3, multiply by 4. Thus getting 4 times the absolute value of x. And the last thing you're going to do is to subtract 3. So step 4, subtract 3. Thus you get 4 times the absolute value of x minus 3. Now, since we're interested in f of 2, we can say that the number we're selecting is 2 because that's your input. So we can say, well, we have pick a number. Well, I'm going to pick 2. Take its absolute value. So we have absolute value of 2 is equal to 2. Multiply that by 4. So we have 4 times 2 gives you 8. And then subtract 3. So we have 8 minus 3 is 5. So we can say that f of 2 is equal to 5. Now, let's double check our work by using a second method, or method 2, called the substitution method. Since we want f of 2, we know that the input is 2. So notice here, instead of x, we're given 2. So what we're going to do, we're going to replace every single x on the right-hand side with a 2. So we have that f of 2 is equal to 4 times the absolute value of 2 minus 3. Now, the absolute value, it's a grouping symbol, kind of like the parentheses when it comes to the order of operations. So we can say that f of 2 is equal to 4 times the absolute value of 2, which is 2 minus 3. Now, following the order of operations, since we already took care of the grouping symbol, we're going to now do the multiplication. So we have that f of 2 is equal to 4 times 2, which is 8 minus 3. And now we take care of that difference, so f of 2 is equal to 8 minus 3, which is 5. And notice that regardless of which method we used, we actually get that f of 2 is equal to 5. Now, as part of an extension, we can say that we have the point with coordinates 2, 5. Why is that the case? Well, that's the case because your input or x value is 2 and your corresponding output or y value is 5. Let's see another example. Example 2. Given g of x is equal to negative 5 times the absolute value of x plus 7, find g of negative 2. So we're going to find g of negative 2 again using our two methods. So method 1, description. Now notice that you have your input x and you actually have your output as negative 5 times the absolute value of x plus 7. Okay, so if we were to describe this, the first thing we do is to pick a number. We call that x. Now, the next thing we're going to do to x is to take its absolute value. So take its absolute value. After that, you're going to multiply by -5. And the last thing you're going to do is to add 7. So step 4, add 7. Now let's double check that this sequence of steps actually generates the function g of x. So we said pick a number, we call that x, good. Now take its absolute value. So we have the absolute value of x. Multiply that by -5. So we have -5 times the absolute value of x, and then add 7. So we have -5 times the absolute value of x plus 7. And notice that that gives you the right-hand side, or the output, for this particular function. Now, since we're interested in g of -2, we know that that -2 is now our input. So at step 1, when I pick the number, I'm going to choose -2. Now step 2, take its absolute value. So we have absolute value of -2, that is equal to 2. And then multiply that by -5. So we have -5 times 2, that gives us -10. And then add 7. So we have -10 plus 7, that's equal to -3. So we can say that g of -2 is equal to -3. Now let's double check this answer by using our second method, or method 2, also known as a substitution method. Now what we're going to do through this method is to take our input and substitute it in wherever we see an input x. So we have g of -2 is equal to -5 times the absolute value of -2 plus 7. Now, we're going to use the order of operations to figure out what g of -2 is. So we have g of -2 is equal to -5 times the absolute value of -2, which is 2, plus 7. Now again, following the order of operations, we get that g of -2 is equal to -5 times 2, which is -10, plus 7. And we get that g of -2 is equal to -10 plus 7, which is -3. And notice that regardless of which method we use, we get that g of -2 is equal to -3. Now, as an extension, we can say that we're given the point with coordinates -2, -3. Now let's see one more example. Example 3. Given h of x is equal to the opposite of absolute value of x plus 15, find h of 0. So let's go ahead and figure this one out using our two methods. So method 1, description. Now notice that in order for us to generate the function h of x, we actually take x as our input, and we're going to get the opposite of the absolute value of x plus 15 as your output. Now let's describe that. So the first thing we're going to do is to pick a number. That's your selection of your input. In this case, our input is x. Now to that x, you're going to take the absolute value. So that's step 2. Take its absolute value. Thus, you get absolute value of x. Now, the next step is to take its opposite, or get the additive inverse. That way, we can get the opposite of the absolute value of x. And the last thing that we're doing is to add the 15. So step 4, add 15. thus you get the absolute value of x, or the opposite of the absolute value of x, plus 15. Now that we have the description of the process to generate the function h of x, we can figure out what is h of 0. Now notice that your input is 0, so our starting number is 0 here. So we can say, well, pick a number. Well, we choose 0. Take its absolute value. We have absolute value of 0 is equal to 0. Take its opposite. The opposite of 0 is 0. And lastly, add 15. So we have 0 plus 15 equals 15. Therefore, we can say that h of 0 is equal to 15. Now let's double check our answer by using method 2. So method 2, substitution. So what we're going to do in order to figure out what is h of 0 is to substitute the 0 into this expression on the right wherever we see an x. So we have the opposite of absolute value of 0 plus 15. So h of 0 is equal to the opposite of absolute value of 0, which is 0, plus 15. And the opposite of 0 is equal to 0. So we take that 0 and add the 15 to get the h of 0. And 0 plus 15 is 15. So we get that h of 0 is equal to 15. And once again, notice that regardless of which method we use, we still get that h of 0 is equal to 15. Now, as part of an extension, we can say that this generates a point with coordinates 0, 15. Why is that the case? Because the input, or x value, is 0, and its corresponding output, or y value, is 15. So this concludes this video on function notation, absolute value functions, part 2. Thank you for watching, and have a wonderful day.